ever tested for HIV before?
No.
You said no.
Never.
It's the first time.
First time.
Wow.
Is this your questionnaire?
Yes.
Okay.
These tests claim to be HIV tests. I'm going to read from a section that says limitations of the test. The specificity of the Reveal Rapid HIV antibody test for blood specimens in low-risk populations has not been evaluated. They don't know, in their terms even, how well this test is going to work in people they don't want it to work in. Low risk. We don't think you're at risk.
Tell me about your sex life.
My sex life.
Us? Okay, since you haven't exposed yourself, lied, sex,
Right.
you're not homosexual, you're gay, you know your story.
Yes.
Let us go and find out.
In 1990, we flew to Romania to adopt a baby. We found Lindsay, and she was only 2 weeks old. I can still remember that feeling, just holding Lindsay for the first time, thinking, now my dream is going to come true. I'll have one of those children. Before we left Romania, we had to make sure that she didn't have HIV. We had to find a doctor, and he did the test, and it came back negative. We flew home just after Christmas, 1990, and thought we had it made.
So I'm going to do a test which comprises of 2 test kits. These 2 test kits are from 2 different countries. Why you are putting them being 2, you want them to confirm each other. Can they be 2 different outcomes? Then this one is a determiner, which is going to give us the final results.
Can I just ask you something, as someone who's a little nervous?
Okay.
It seems like if this is positive and this is negative, my life hangs in the balance on whatever this one is.
Yes.
But how do we know that this one's accurate when both of these were inaccurate?
This one has been tested to be the one that is going to take out the results that are correct.
Oh, so this one is more accurate than these 2?
Yes, according to what we have learned.
So why don't we just use the more accurate one to begin with?
Well, you know what? What if now the more accurate one has a discrepancy? How are you going to find out?
I don't know.
Rapid tests in Germany, it's not allowed for standard diagnostics.
May I ask why? How come you don't use rapid tests for standard diagnostics?
Several professional organizations who decide as an expert committee on guidelines how to do things. None of these responsible societies recommend it for scientific reasons.
We always say to our clients, even if you have tested here, you can go to other centers and go and test and verify our test. You cannot say we're 100% because you find clients going from area to area doing tests. And they come with stories that I was negative at a certain area, I'm positive with you.
How do they decide whether they're positive or negative?
We cannot tell because we are using a rapid test.
It occurred to me that perhaps the HIV epidemic is reported to be so widespread in South Africa and other poor nations simply because they use these inaccurate tests.
There's the saying that if you knew how what sausages are made of, most people would hesitate to sort of eat them because they wouldn't like what's in it. And if you knew how HIV/AIDS numbers are cooked or made up, you would use them with extreme caution.
I decided to investigate HIV testing protocols used throughout the developed world.
When we're testing people for HIV, the first thing we do is a screening test, and it's usually a test called the ELISA.
But there are also now available rapid assays that can be used as screening methods.
Because they're faster. And we all know faster and cheaper is more efficient.
If an ELISA is positive, it does not mean that the patient is HIV positive. That's a problem.
If we're using antibodies as a screening test to tell who's infected or not, very occasionally you can get false positives.
So screening tests by themselves should not be used as a definitive measure of infection. That's why we use a screening test to pick up all the cases, but we use a confirmatory test to eliminate any false positives.
Take it easy. I'll pierce at the side.
It should be emphasized that most of the developing world uses only screening tests to confirm an HIV diagnosis. There are no confirmatory tests.
Time now is 25 past. At 22, the results will be out, which is going to be 15 minutes.
9 days after returning home, Steve and Cheryl's pediatrician ran a battery of tests on Lindsay, including an HIV test, even though Lindsay had tested negative for the virus in Romania.
Dr. McHugh called us and said, we run into some problems with the testing that you did at Methodist Hospital, and you'll need to come right in and see me.
I said, well, what is it? She says, well, I'm not going to tell you over the phone. I said, I need to know exactly what this is. He said, we got bad news that she tests positive.
And he said, she'll have a 20% chance of living to age 2. That was just a shock. Just a shock after all this joy and happiness. We finally found our daughter, and I'm dancing around Romania, and now I come home, and it's like somebody could just stab me. And then I had to call my mom, and that was the worst phone call I've ever had to make, because I even remember saying, that poor girl, she's just not gonna make it.
So that we don't have to go to somebody and say, well, you might be infected, but it might be a false positive. We do a second test. That's a test usually called the Western blot.
In 1992, when I was told by my doctor that I was HIV positive, that was only a verbal admission to me. She didn't give me the written paper that came from the lab that tested my blood. I found out that it says this indicates possible infection by virus.
There can be mistakes from the antibody test, and there are conditions that can cause the test to be inaccurate.
Now that I've got the package insert for that test kit, it says positive results using any specimen type should be followed with additional testing. But this is the test that they use to confirm with.
This has a margin of error done properly that's extremely low. In other words, it's one of medicine's better tests.
I don't think the Western blot is a useful diagnostic test. I don't think it's worth doing.
Did he give a reason? Anybody can say anything. I think it's stupid to drive a car. But come on, you got to give a reason.
It's a useful prognostic test. Once you know that someone is infected, then you can follow their antibody responses well with Western blots.
I'd say he's absolutely wrong. It has a complete usefulness.
You don't need a Western blot. And it's become a dogma in HIV research that you need one ELISA followed by a Western. You don't. You need 2 different kinds of ELISAs made in 2 different formats.
Would you ever want to confirm somebody is positive using just ELISAs?
No, never. It's against the rules. It's against the recommendations.
It's a turbulent sea of argument about how can we use this test? When can we use this test? Why does this test have no standard?
We have a group now of about 40 patients that have no detectable virus in their body, but they're not being treated. Mm-hmm. So the first question is, are they really infected?
So the Western blots can have false positives?
No, the Western blot was negative too. But they were told they were positive by a lab, yes, that misread the Western blot.
Heavyweight champion Tommy Morrison tested positive in 1996. 11 years later, in 2007, he tested negative multiple times, allowing him to return to the ring.
There's constant discussion in the community of people who do diagnostic testing and the blood bankers about how to read these tests.
When you're looking at this Western blot, how do you determine what is a positive?
You need a certain number of bands being present. It depends a little bit on the producer of the test.
It depends on the manufacturer. Is there different criteria for what might be a positive?
Yeah, there are different criteria from the manufacturer. Thank you for the word. And also there are guidelines from the WHO and UNAIDS.
Well, HIV infection is diagnosed with rather now routine laboratory tests, which for which there are criteria for diagnosis established by the manufacturer, FDA.
Claudia showed me the package insert that comes with the Western blot. It contains 8 different sets of criteria for diagnosing HIV infection.
Because of the different criteria that apply in different countries, you can test HIV positive in one country and be given an AIDS diagnosis as a result of that, whereas in another country you won't test HIV positive and you won't be given an AIDS diagnosis.
It's ludicrous that you can be positive in one country and not positive in another.
Theoretically, I could be diagnosed with AIDS in the United States, but if I take 3 steps to my right, I wouldn't be diagnosed with AIDS, or I would lose my AIDS diagnosis when I cross the border.
In 1992, I was encouraged by a doctor to take what's called an HIV test as a matter of social responsibility, and I was shocked and devastated and horrified when the results came back positive. It was one of those moments that everyone fears their whole life. A week later, I take the same test to an AIDS specialist. He looks and says, "This isn't a positive test. I don't know what this test means."